The Automagic Horse by L. Ron Hubbard.
It ain't the principle of the thing, it's the money,
said Gadget O'Dowd.
The day when I can build you a reasonable facsimile of man o' war for $10,000, I'll know recession is here.
Mike Doyle, the assistant chief of the technical division of the property department of United Pictures, slumped sadly behind his desk, looking at Gadget. Ordinarily, they were friends, but they had reached an impasse.
Gadget, we pay you $2,000 a week to be a construction genius. Look at what you've done in the past. And now you're trying to balk at a lousy little old mechanical horse.
Gadget reached into the pocket of his $90 sport jacket, pulled out a $1,000 platinum cigarette case, and offered Mike one of his special-made smokes. Mike, refusing, Gadget lit his own with a diamond-studded lighter. He smoked pensively. Gadget was slender, snub-nosed, and Irish. He was trying to look frank just now, but for all that, he could not quite hide a single fact about himself. He was a man who harbored an enormous secret. He had been christened George Carlton O'Dowd, and he had enough university degrees to comfortably paper a large office. He could have been the chief of any number of vast research organizations, but instead, he was an effects specialist for United Pictures. The reason was highly classified, and it demanded money.
This budgeteering will ruin me yet. It is getting so a man can't make a dishonest dollar unless he's first cousin to the president of this company. I can't make a horse that will do what you want unless you up that budget. And that's final.
Mike Doyle got up and sat down again on the edge of his desk. He was earnest and persuasive.
Now listen, Gadget, have a heart. I can't help what these men in the upper echelon are trying to do. They give me my assignments and they tell me what I'm supposed to do. And that's that. Look at the spot we're in. The script says right here that Miss Morris has to gallop a horse out of the middle of a burning barn, bust through the doors, and escape from Peter Butler, who's got the place ringed with his gunmen. Now, Gadget, you know doggone well that the Society for the Prevention of the Cruelty of Animals ain't gonna let us use no live horse. This scene has gotta be big, with lots of flame. And the roof caves in immediately after the stuntmen get out of there. Now, if he didn't get a chance to batter down the doors and the roof fell in, and it was a live horse we was using, the SPCA would be down on us like a load of blockbusters. You just plain gotta give us a decent horse. You know what happened in Diana and the Devil?
No what?
Well, that little dog they used in there that was supposed to rescue the kid out of the duck pond got up and got pneumonia and died. The SPCA got ladies' aid societies all over the country to ban that picture. It must have cost us $1.5 million. Gadget, you just gotta get us a horse.
If the Wall Street boys upstairs want to give a dog pneumonia and lose $1.5 million, that's their lookout. I've got to think about my overhead.
Well, and you gotta think about your old age. I tell you what I'll do. I'm a friend of yours. I'll call up to McDonald and see if he won't stretch that budget to $15,000.
Gadget waited while Mike had his secretary put through the call. McDonald was in the studio barbershop, and it took 2 or 3 minutes to reach him. Gadget fidgeted while Mike talked.
Well, but you know how it is, I tell you, Mr. McDonald. Even horse meat has gone up. Yes, the special effects man is here now, and he tells me that it can't be done for a cent less than $20,000. Uh-huh. Right. Okay. All right, if that's all you can do, that's all you can do. No, I know you got people on your neck, too. All right, Mr. McDonald. Yes, that is the movie business. Goodbye, sir. Well, I got it up to $18,000. If you can't do it for that, we'll have to use stuntmen in horse skin.
Gadget threw away his cigarette with sudden decision. He was all lightness and cheer now. He had expected $15,000 as a top figure. His head was already working with plans of what he would do to that horse. He patted Mike affectionately on the shoulder and went out. Hands deep in his pockets, Gadget sauntered on down toward the gate. He turned to find himself pursued by Mike. He sadly shut his mental ledgers.
Just a minute, Gadget. McDonald must have got kicked around the front office. He called back to say that he'd have to put an accountant on the job with you.
An accountant?
I can't help it. Things are getting tough all over.
Well, that's the movie business. So long, Mike.
And he wandered toward the gate, gloom overcasting the sun. Tony, his gardener, butler, chauffeur, a weasel-faced little man who played gangster parts whenever Central Casting could find him in its enormous files, popped out to open the door for him.
What's the matter, Gadget?
We have an accountant coming up to hold a club over our heads. Don't use so much ink. You've used up your allotment of screwdrivers for Tuesday. I'm sure 2 drops and not 3 drops of machine oil will do just as well. Blah! The movie business.
Well, things could be worse.
Said Tony, popping in back of the wheel and sending the Horsch Sports convertible out through the gate like a lightning bolt.
I picked up $2 on Roman Baby in the 5th at Santa Anita.
Don't mention horses to me.
Said Gadget, and he sank down to glare at the sides of Cahuenga Pass as they ripped by. The studio would not permit Gadget to have his laboratory on the lot, since it had twice blown up, to say nothing of the last blasts having knocked the toupee from a producer's head. They had bought him a slice of Sherman Oaks on the theory that the people who lived around there didn't matter. The car sliced up Ventura Boulevard past repulsive pictures at Laurel Canyon and careened into the exclusive side road which led to Gadget's personal domain. When they screeched to a halt at the door, old Angus McBain, complete with blacksmith's apron, tobacco-stained walrus mustache, and a paint advertising cap, was on hand to hear the news. McBain and Tony Marconio made up Gadget's family. Angus was a Scotch master mechanic who had been re-educated much against his will by engineer O'Dowd. In return, he had done considerable educating of his own. Angus could make anything from a lady's wristwatch to an atom bomb, providing Gadget gave him the general details.
Well, I suppose you failed.
Nope. They upped it to 18,000.
Hey! But I suppose there was many a string attached to it.
There was. We have to take on an accountant.
An accountant? You mean I'll have to account for every measly wee bit of tin and cut corners and save string?
I'm afraid so.
Aye, it isn't worth it, laddie. Where and away now will we be getting the new wing for the shop?
The three of them looked at the low, rambling structure. It was painted white and had window boxes. It appeared to be as innocent as any rose-covered cottage. But this laboratory ran back into the Hollywood Hills for a good 1/8 of a mile. Its chambers and rooms were equipped with all manner of scientific bric-a-brac. The planned left wing would go underground far enough to permit an experimentation with gamma rays. It costs money to drill solid rock, particularly when it has to be reinforced against possible earthquakes. They had counted on this present job to complete it.
I know we tried.
Well, I didn't expect any more. No, Chief. What onerous task begins this sad travail?
Well, it's got to be a horse.
Something like inspiration came into his eyes. His stature grew. His hair glowed.
It's got to be a horse that will run and buck and break down a door and be fairly fireproof. I think maybe you'd better start in with a hide.
He was thinking now, like an artist who begins to conceive a great masterpiece. He forgot the financial worry and his own current project in the joy of pure creation.
I'll take care of the skeletal structure as soon as I can get to the drawing board. I'll use that new alpha battery motor we built for Frankenstein's mate. But the thing is, it has got to look real. It's got to act real. It's got to be a masterpiece. Angus, first thing you do is find a hide. I'll fireproof it. You just find a hide.
Yeah, but who's gonna fireproof the stuntman?
Well, there isn't any SPCA for stuntmen. Now, Angus, you find me a horse.
Well, we cannot kill it. There's no difference between murdering one and burning another.
Well, now, don't bother me with petty details. I'm thinking. You just get out and find me a good horse hide. Head, ears, everything. We can use that blind man radar from the bat's return for his eyes. Now, let me see.
Angus hung up his leather apron behind the bar, removed his paint advertising cap, and got into an old tweed coat.
How much shall I pay, laddie?
Steal it if possible. When that accountant gets here, we'll tell him.
A
You'll
cool
tell her
voice
what?
behind him said.
You'll tell her what?
They whirled to find themselves looking at a girl who could have been a stand-in for Hedy Lamarr. She was beautifully gowned and coiffed. She had everything about her to add charm and femininity which Hollywood could devise. But for all that, there was a grim precision which came from something unseen. It made her, as Gadget estimated in the first glance, about as lovable as one of his special effects for The Ghost Rider.
I am Miss Franklin. I'm from the front office.
She said, extending her hand. Gadget took it as though he expected it to carry 30 or 40,000 volts.
That was just a joke.
I'm sure it was. At least I hope so. I have been looking over your budget and various expenditures, Mr. O'Dowd. The office has warned me to be very careful. Dishonesty is a thing I cannot tolerate.
Hey, miss, this lad doesn't have a crooked hair on his head.
Well, I shouldn't think it would be necessary for a man who already draws $2,000 a week.
Aye, miss, I would.
Whatever it was he would have said was drowned in a clank and roar from the far side of the room. Tony, behind the bar, had pressed a remote control, and now the monster used in the Lost Tribe, with a yard of flame shooting out of his face, stepped away from the wall with a sound like scrunching bones. He reached out his arms toward Miss Franklin. Now, any normal human girl, as they had many times in the past, would have fainted then and there, but not Miss Franklin. She cuffed the monster soundly on the jaw and sat him down with a dreadful clatter of jarred parts.
That was very effective on the screen, but I think it rather childish of you to keep it around. May I ask where my office is?
Struck dumb, Gadget escorted her through a door into a chrome and mahogany cubicle, which he usually turned over to visiting engineers. He left her to spread out her account books and pencils on the desk. He noted that she did it in a disgustingly precise manner. Now he would never make any progress with that gamma room tunnel. In his own office, he sank down at his drawing board and picked up his pencil.
Well, there's other schemes.
Not that pay $2,000 a week.
You don't have to keep on with the project.
Gadget looked at him, suddenly stricken. Tony recoiled.
I'm sorry. I know what we got to do. I was just kidding, Chief.
Gadget shafted out another glare and looked back at the board. Tony said no more about it. It was, in fact, entirely against the law to mention it around here. But all this slaving and sweating and dollar grubbing was on the high road to as gallant and daring a project as mankind could conceive. The three of them were dedicated, soul and pocketbook, to an endeavor which would have made even Samuel Goldwyn dizzy. They weren't going to make a super-colossal epic. They weren't going to overthrow United Pictures. They weren't going to elect a president. No. Their dreams had no such finite limits. Gadget and company were headed for the moon. And after that, Mars. And after that, stars. No two-bit research job for Gadget like chief of Westinghouse Laboratory. No little niche like head of the Army or Navy. No peanut-sized job like the presidency of the United States or the boss of the United Nations. This Irishman had slightly larger plans. He intended to make a test voyage around the moon and then a full jaunt to Mars, following which he was going to break the wall of light and get out there where they had some man-sized planets. Every penny he could beg, chisel, or even earn was tied up in the Voyager 1. Every one of his experiments was slanted to some improvement of that ship. Actual parts of it were scattered here and there throughout these laboratories, and its full design, constantly modified, was guarded by a safe in the floor so burglar-proof that the FBI in full force couldn't have cracked it. This was the secret of Gadget O'Dowd, and this was the plan to which his family was dedicated to the death. Top secret. Top. Tony tiptoed out of there, knowing better than to say another word. The following afternoon, an incident occurred which sounded the general alarm loud enough to call both Gadget and Tony from a hasty lunch. They rushed into the first chamber of the workshop where electrical effects were ordinarily made and were startled into immobility by a very strange sight. Miss Franklin, who as far as Gadget could find out had no first name, was there. She was dressed in a lovely afternoon gown with a stupefying pair of horn-rimmed glasses perched on her very smudged nose. Her pencil was poised militantly over a notebook. Facing her was Angus McBain, half covered by a horsehide which he had been in the act of dragging through the door. Angus saw with relief that reinforcements were approaching from the other entrance.
Gadget, she's taken inventory.
Now, if he had told Gadget and Tony that Miss Franklin had been caught dismembering a newborn infant, they could not have been more shocked. Gadget glared.
Miss Franklin, I think this is going a little too far. After all, you will find a complete inventory in my office. I'm sure everything is on it, which is the property of United Pictures. This distrust is heartbreaking. I cannot understand how you might suppose that we would have been so remiss as to leave important objects off that inventory. Now, these chambers are no place for a lady. That equipment you are looking at was used to furnish the dead man's scene in The Mad Doctor. It is rigged to jump 100,000 volts between those electrodes. Anyone coming in here is liable to get injured. Then how would I explain it to the studio? I swear to you, Miss Franklin, that you will find our inventory...
Her voice sawed into his speech like a sharpened icicle.
Mr. O'Dowd, I have already found 25 transformers, 17 condensers, something which is labeled an alpha pile, and 9 cathode ray tubes which do not occur on that so-called inventory of yours. I suppose you can account for these satisfactorily.
They are my own equipment, which I have loaned free of charge to United Pictures. I have not said one word...
Mr. O'Dowd, you know very well that we have rules against private property and a studio technical laboratory. It must be registered with the studio. How else can one keep these matters straight? If you have been so slack in registering your own property and accounting for how you came by it, I cannot help but suppose that there are other irregularities. I am afraid that I must conduct an entire inventory of everything here.
Oh, and how about my own tools? I cannot work without them, and they are so numerous that would take weeks just to list them.
I suppose you want me to list my driving gloves too. See here, boss. You want I should rub this dame out?
Miss Franklin looked coolly at Gadget's man.
Corn. Pure corn. No wonder you aren't even a bit player anymore. For your information, your driving gloves should be registered. According to paragraph 3 of section 5 of the accountancy regulations, everything which is used in the execution of studio business is either the property of the studio or must be registered with it for proper rental fees.
Gadget instantly brightened.
Well then, Miss Franklin, I fear we shall have to stop work on this horse long enough for you to carry out the inventory which you will require.
On the contrary, Mr. O'Dowd, I do not think that will be necessary. I have here a breakdown of past budgets. Checking back into the inventory, I find that there are many items included in past budgets which do not appear on the inventory. I would suggest that you get on with your horse. I shall continue the business of protecting United's property. If there's any discrepancy, you can take it up with me later.
Gadget leaned his head up against the door jamb and beat a futile fist against the wall.
Give 'em control of money and you make czars out of 'em. No wonder the Russians revolted.
He faced her again and put out a beseeching hand.
Miss Franklin, I am a scientist. You are an accountant. You are an expert in such matters. How could I help it if I made a few mistakes here and there? You must understand.
$150,000 is a lot of mistakes. But go on with your work. I am sure that after a proper adjustment is made on these books, no word of it will reach the studio. But you have here equipment which must be sold, and it is up to me to take care of that.
Over my dead body!
He threw down the horsehide.
Lady or no lady,
Gadget quickly stepped forward and slipped his arm through Miss Franklin's.
Let's go into the outer office and talk this thing over quietly.
Miss Franklin wavered and then reached out her hand for the bill which Angus had been gripping.
I suppose that's the bill for the thing you're carrying?
Angus surrendered it, and Gadget was able to lead the militant accountant into the main room. He was trying to distract her attention, but she read the bill anyway.
My. Well, now, that's a bit high for a horse ride. $2,800. And he's even added taxi fare.
Gadget looked at it, puckering his brow.
I see here, he couldn't have a horse killed for the purpose. The only thing he could do was get a stuffed horse out of the museum. That's natural now, isn't it? See? It says right here at the top, the Santa Ana Museum, stuffed relic of Stardust, sired by man of war. You remember Stardust? She was a famous racer. Now, you wouldn't expect to buy her for a measly $2,800, would you? She won $190,000 in just one season. And after she goes through that fire, I'm afraid her hide won't be worth very much.
Well, I'm not interested in the cost of individual items, but only in the entire budget. I have no wish to obstruct your work, Mr. O'Dowd. I am afraid, however, that I shall need to pursue that inventory.
Please, please let it go until a time when I can help you with it. Many of the items you will find are alive and dangerous. Why, just last week, we had a truck driver executed by a short circuit in a dinosaur from Caveman.
He got her back to his office and was shortly able to rejoin Angus. Gadget picked up the horsehide.
Why, it does look like Stardust.
Sure, and it is. Me and the curator was howling savage drunk half the night. Somehow in the scuffle, Stardust came out at the seams.
What will happen to the voucher?
Oh, when the studio pays it, the curator will pay us back all but 10%. That's to be his squeeze. After all, this is Hollywood.
Movie business.
Said Tony with a sage nod. He followed his two conspirators into the blacksmith's shop, where Gadget had already sketched the structural devices necessary for the skeleton. Angus resumed his apron and blew up the forge. He picked up a bar of fine steel, glanced at the skeleton, and began to bend it.
'Tis a weary time that we'll have with that lassie. 'Twere nights ago when I saw the moon. 'Twas through the trees, and it boded no good.
The place was soon a roaring, smoking mass of sparks and clangs. The Automagic horse, named Stardust, was beginning to take form. During the ensuing 6 weeks, Gadget O'Dowd was so busy that he had little, if any, time to devote to his gravity repulsor. The 3 test units of this machine and the parts of the main construction lay deep in a hidden and so far uninventoried recess of the laboratory. Miss Franklin was kept busy paying a stream of engineers and delivery boys from RCA, General Electric, and Bell Telephone, who brought odds and ends of electronic gear, looked happily at the steed, made suggestions, and went on their way. Every tube, booster, and transformer was carefully recorded in Miss Franklin's black book. Meanwhile, she went on about her inventory with a grim little smile.
Now look here,
Gadget said one morning when the horse was nearing completion.
You've just got to understand that you are a dame and you don't know what I need around here and what I don't.
I have nothing to do with that. United Pictures doesn't care how much equipment you have so long as you are using it or intend to use it on their projects. Personally, it seems to me that you would be well to get rid of the great deal of this material. It's terribly expensive and too duplicated for any real use in the future. I think I shall recommend to the front office that we hold an electronic junk sale here.
No. When I get time, I'll explain to you just why it is that we need every piece of this stuff.
This explanation had better be good.
Oh, it is. But right now, I have a horse to finish. Has that taxidermist arrived yet?
The taxidermist had. Gadget took the taxidermist back into the laboratory and showed him the completed skeletal structure.
Oh, what an odd frame. Limbs in perfect proportion. Face structure perfect. And all in position and order. My word, Mr. O'Dowd, the National Museum could use you.
That's what I'm afraid of.
The taxidermist was shedding his maroon sport coat.
Stretching the hide over this shouldn't be too difficult, providing you haven't made it too large.
Can you make the skin flexible? That's the one problem I haven't been able to lick.
Oh, quite certainly. I have some preservative oils here, but why should you want it flexible, Mr. O'Dowd?
Oh, just a whim of mine.
The taxidermist had picked up the skin and was again examining the skeletal structure. It had been covered with a paper to keep out dust, and he had thought that it was just stuffing. But when he pulled the paper away, there was the amazing mass of wires and tubes. He backed up as fast as if Frankenstein's monster had just jumped him.
My word! Are you sure it isn't intended to explode?
Not a bit of it. Now, let's get down to the business of skin stretching, what?
The taxidermist put on his saffron working coat and went solemnly to work, rehabilitating the head and hide of Stardust.
Now, cover up all those seams and make sure all the joints will move without cracking the skin.
Move?
Move!
Well, my word. This is the first time I've ever had this kind of job. Well, that's the movie business.
Movie business.
Gadget finished up some of the remaining set adjustments on the control box and then, bored, wandered out to the outer office to see what Miss Franklin had been up to now. He found a brightly dressed and briefcased young man talking to the accountant. Introduction discovered him to be Mr. Jules Weinbaum, first cousin of Artemis Weinbaum, producer of Queens in Scarlet, the picture for which the Automagic horse was intended. Naturally, Mr. Weinbaum had insurance to sell, and naturally, Miss Franklin was buying it.
Well, it's all cared for now,
said Mr. Weinbaum.
I understand that you've almost completed the property, Mr. O'Dowd, and I wish you a great deal of success with it.
He shook hands again, ceremoniously, and went outside. Miss Franklin filed the policy.
Now, just because it's insured, don't get careless.
You look after the dollars, Miss Franklin, and I'll look after the property.
Well, now, why be angry? I am, after all, only trying to do my job, Mr. O'Dowd. And you will admit that your scientific absent-mindedness has caused a great deal of mix-up in these records. If I don't do my job, I'll lose it. And I need it. I need it very badly.
Gadget looked at her, feeling trapped and not knowing why. This accountant was not content to fight with all the weapons of her profession and the artillery of the front office. She was also using a woman's tears on him. Suddenly, furious, he went into the bar and poured himself fully half a quart of buttermilk. After 2 days of hard work, the taxidermist was at the end of his task. He was a good taxidermist, but then the technicians of Hollywood are superlatively good. It occasioned no comment that the Automagic horse was now Stardust indeed, in the flesh once more, unspotted by so much as a speck of museum dust. She was real down to the last hair. Stardust had a big white star on her forehead, with flecks of white ranging back into the sorrel which sleekly covered the rest of her. She was indeed a very attractive horse. Angus came in, lugging a hand sprayer and a bucket. They thoroughly doused her with invisible fireproofing.
That's a good-looking filly,
Gadget said to the taxidermist.
Thanks for a fine job.
He went over to the control box and lifted it by its handle to a desk.
What do you intend to do with it? I never mounted anything before that had to have its joints flexible.
Gadget was not paying any attention to him. He plugged in 3 relays, threw the switch, and twisted a dial. Stardust instantly lifted up her head and let loose a shrill whinny, at the same time rearing and pawing air. She faced around and showed the taxidermist both of her front hoofs. The taxidermist did a back somersault, raced out the door, went past Miss Franklin, and only paused long enough on the running board of his car to grab the check which she hastily brought to him. Then he was gone.
What did you do to that man?
Said Miss Franklin, thinking she heard Gadget at the door. But it was not Gadget. It was Stardust going through her first test, which was, of course, to batter down doors. The panel gave with a crash, and the filly came through into the office, ducked under the front entrance, and stood in the front yard, rearing and plunging. Miss Franklin lay where she had fainted, until O'Dowd found her and revived her. She looked fearfully at the splinters and then into the garden where stood a statue of a horse arrested in mid-rear.
She does look kind of real at that,
said Tony in appreciation. He and Gadget and Angus had, at this moment, become extremely fond of Stardust.
Get me a horse trailer. I've got to take her out to Santa Anita for a trial.
Miss Franklin made no protest and asked no questions. She promptly got up, went over to the telephone, and dialed the San Fernando trailers and ordered a horse trailer. She looked back at the horse as she laid down the phone. Then she looked at Gadget.
It certainly looks real. I thought it was going to tear me to pieces.
Well, she didn't.
Miss Franklin tidied up her hair and smoothed out her rumpled gown.
Well, that's the movie business.
Gadget looked fondly at the horse.
Yep, that's the movie business.
Tony drove at a fast clip towards Santa Anita. It was beginning to get dark as they drove down Colorado Street in Pasadena. They were almost there. Gadget looked at his ruby-encrusted wristwatch.
I don't understand it. Everybody can rob the studios but us.
And he broke the rule which he himself had made.
It isn't as if United wouldn't get the benefit of it. Why, when those headlines hit the papers, United will be in about every fourth paragraph. They couldn't buy that publicity for 90 million bucks.
Aye, and they wouldn't have financed it for 10 measly cents.
Maybe we can put the squeeze on Suddenmity if kidnapping just wasn't so illegal.
I don't wish Miss Franklin any hard luck, but I wish she'd accidentally fall off the Colorado Street Bridge. It's going to cost us a couple of $100,000 to buy back our own equipment, and after all the trouble we had chiseling it too.
How much?
Well, 90,000 so far.
Well, maybe we should crack a bank.
Probably have to give up the whole expedition.
Instantly, he was fixed with glares from both Tony and O'Dowd, and he sank back with some self-satisfaction to gnaw off his plug of tobacco. The expectoration into the windstream splattered the horse trailer behind. They wheeled into the gate and made themselves known to the guard. Tony scrambled around and opened up the rear of the horse trailer. Gadget set up the control box under the rail. And Angus laid out a set of tools in case any adjustments had to be made. It was their intention to give Stardust a good, thorough test. Otherwise, they could very well hold up production on Queens and Scarlet for a day or two by a minor breakdown, which would cost the studio at least $100,000 due to stars' salaries, stage rentals, and other overhead. One lost day's work for Veronica Morris alone would be worth retiring on. Technicians have to be very accurate in the movie business. Tony set up 2 cases of soda and a package of sandwiches. Then he peeled off his chauffeur's coat to don the frontier buckskin jacket which the stuntman would wear in the scene when he impersonated Veronica Morris.
I gotta get in the mood for the pot.
Stardust backed out of the trailer under her own power. She stood breathing quietly and occasionally snorting and flicking an ear while Angus fixed the saddle on her. Tony mounted and located the stirrups with his toes. He spoke encouragingly. Stardust moved her eyes, pawed, and moved off with the sideways restlessness of a racehorse.
Pretty good, eh? I spent 2 hours last night looking at some films of her when she was in her prime. Now, watch this.
Stardust shook her head in a huge negative, snorted, and cakewalked forward.
That's pretty good. I remember that. By golly, you got me half tricked into believing this is Stardust.
Well, be careful with the lady. When she was alive, she brought me nothing but travail and sorrow. I ken losing 75 cents on her to that scut of a Bucky Finkelstein.
Stardust capered and cavorted. Tony had to do a little expert riding to stay with her. But then, this was in Tony's line. In training up to be a bit player, he had undertaken almost any sport you could name. He was fully as proficient on a saddle as he was in an airplane. The only thing which kept him from being a stuntman was an irrational desire to go on living in one piece. Gadget sent the horse down to the starting gate. Without any attention from the operator, Stardust was able to find a box and go into it, stopping when she approached the gate itself.
You're not going to run her!
Well, according to the script, she has to do a 200-yard sprint after she gets out of that broken door. It's all in one shot to convince the customer, so she'd better know how to run. All right there, Tony. Are you ready?
Let's go. Boy, I wish this was a real race.
The floodlights glared down upon the track. The gate sprung and Stardust rushed forward, back-jumping the first 6 strides and then settling into a long-distance devouring run. Tony, well into character now, laid on his whip and yelled encouragingly into the horse's ear. Stardust went around the turn, came into the backstretch, and began to thunder home. She was splitting the air like a lightning bolt. Above the pounds of hooves, Tony's shrill... Stardust came into the home stretch, speeded up, and dashed across the finish line. Gadget brought the mount to a plunging halt. Stardust came trotting daintily back toward the parked trailer, tossing her head, jingling her bit, and making snorty noises, which indicated that she was out of wind.
Boy, she sure can run.
We'll give her 2 more trials, and then we'll go over to that old western town later tonight and batter down a couple doors. She's got to be all ready by Wednesday.
He was about to turn a dial on the control box when he noticed 3 men standing at the rail, looking interestedly at the horse. He was about to ignore them when he recognized one of the men from his pictures. It was Cliff Neary, the comedian and racing dean, who squandered the millions he made acting on horses. Beside him was his jockey.
Just watching your horse run. Didn't know that Stardust had any colts.
Cliff put out his hand to Gadget.
I'm the owner of the Neary stables. This is my jockey, Pat.
Gadget O'Dowd.
Oh, yes, the special effects man. I remember that we contracted with United for some of your work on my road to Smolensk.
Road to Smolensk. Oh, yes, that was the vodka that broke into flame every time Roy Ellis spat.
Good job.
Well, there was nothing much to that. The things that were difficult in that picture didn't show at all.
I know, you fellas never get much credit for all the little odds and ends that it takes to make a show hang together. But what are you doing out here with a horse? I didn't know that was in your line.
Well, she's kind of a funny horse.
Mighty good looking one.
Said the jockey, staring at Stardust hungrily.
By the way, you wouldn't like to put her up against 3 or 4 of mine, would you? Nothing like a good horse race after a long, hard day's work at the studio.
Angus gaped and was on the verge of laughing when Gadget silenced him with a glare.
Well, now.
Trying not to appear eager, but negligently pulling half a dozen $1,000 bills out of his shirt pocket.
Don't mind if I do.
Don't mind if I do is right. Pat, bring over Thunder Mountain. You think you can boot him up through as a winner?
Pat gave Cliff a white-toothed grin.
I reckon I can, Mr. Neary.
Tony watched all this with eyes which got wider and wider. Then he began to laugh.
Listen, pal, this is pretty tough company you're riding in. The last 3 jocks that tried to beat me got buried with horseshoes of roses. I don't beat easy, see?
The jockey grinned and helped Pat bring Thunder Mountain up to the rail. The horse was a big, powerful stallion that Cliff had bought for quite a piece of change. He was being kept under blankets until the Neary stables could make a cleanup with him. Stardust breathed easily now and cavorted a trifle, edging near Thunder Mountain, who, having horse sense, took one look at the bogus filly and whistled shrilly, backing off.
Whoa now, boy, I never saw you ladies shy before.
Thunder Mountain reared, shook his head angrily, and whistled again, backing even further away from Stardust. Gadget took his cue and removed his Automagic horse down to the gate. Presently, they had both mounts behind the wire, and the race was ready to be run. The trainer held up a blank cartridge pistol. Angus got ready to release the gates, and Cliff eagerly yelled some final riding instructions to Pat. Gadget tried not to appear too interested in the control box on which he was sitting. The gun roared. The gate sprang up, and horse and pseudo-horse were off in a cloud of sawdust. The 6 crisp $1,000 bills were weighted down by a rock, in company with another half dozen just like them, which were fresh from Cliff's purse. Angus, up higher, could see better. He began to make wild signals toward Gadget, who turned up the running speed a notch. The horse and pseudo-horse came into the back stretch, with Thunder Mountain a full furlong in the lead. The shrill of Tony rose above the wheezes and grunts of the running mounts and the pounding of their hoofs. O'Dowd was not idle. He pulled up the dial, and very perceptibly Stardust began to close. When they were still 75 yards from the finish, a wide gap yet remained. Gadget upped his dial another notch. Stardust's stride lengthened. Thunder Mountain strained and lathered, felt the pseudo-horse surge alongside. He put on another burst of speed. But he was no match for Gadget's fingers on the dial. Stardust came neck and neck with Thunder Mountain. In a close finish, there was still no argument. Stardust had won! Cliff turned disconsolately to Pat.
I thought you said that Thunder Mountain could run. Oh, well, easy come, easy go. Mr. O'Dowd, the money is yours, sir. And it is a pleasure to lose to such a gallant gentleman.
Gadget stood looking at the fluttering green leaves.
Mr. Neary,
His conscience was hurting him.
perhaps I ought to tell you that that horse of mine...
No, no, no. A race is a race.
He was looking at the mounts as they came up. They were blowing and whistling from their run.
Say now, that's mighty peculiar. That Stardust of yours doesn't even seem to be winded.
Gadget's heel came down on the control box, and Stardust really began to blow.
No, he really isn't. I mean, she really isn't. In fact, I dare say she could probably run another race if she wanted to.
Cliff looked up alertly. He glanced at the 12 bills and then at O'Dowd.
You don't mean to tell me that you'd be willing to risk another slight run for the money?
Well, now, I think I probably owe it to you, Mr. Neary. Just the same.
Well, say no more. Pat, bring up Sassy Lassie and we'll spin her around again. That is, of course, Mr. O'Dowd, if you have no objections.
If a man wanted to run a blown horse, who was Cliff Neary to refuse the money? Gadget didn't, and the horses were soon lined into position. $24,000, 12 of it in the form of a check on Cliff's bank, were now secured by the rock.
Well, we can't wait forever. Let 'em go.
The pistol banged, the gate lifted, and horse and reasonable facsimile thereof rocketed out into the track. Angus was standing high up, madly chewing tobacco and wondering about the strength of the various pins and cogs. He was wishing that he had foreseen this turn of affairs when he was at his forge. Gadget's conscience was hurting him. He liked Cliff because Cliff was a swell guy.
But when he finds out what the cause is, he'll laugh about it.
Gadget apologized to himself. Many times before, he had vowed that he would pay the studio and his victims back once the fact had been accomplished and man had made a voyage to the moon. His conscience thus relieved, he was willing to forget it and enjoy the horse race. Angus was making wild motions, and Gadget upped the speed a notch, only to find out that Angus's arm signals became wilder. Accordingly, Gadget slowed it back down again, an action which resulted in the Scots' relaxation. The filly and Stardust came scrambling into the stretch, pounding forward, straining every muscle and bolt. Stardust was about 8 lengths in the lead. Evidently, the pseudo-horse had been traveling like a jet job around the first turn. Gadget backed off the control dial even further and let Sassy Lassie catch up. They finished in a cloud of dust and hurrahs, out of which the fact dissolved that Sassy Lassie had been whipped by half a length. After a little, Pat and Tony came back. The jockey was blowing and round-eyed.
Mr. Neary, that there Stardust ran away from me at the start like an airplane. I didn't think I'd ever catch up.
Oh, it's all right, Pat. Some days you can't ever see the back of your neck. Mr. O'Dowd, that's some horse you've got there. I wish there was a little more light. I'd like to look at her teeth.
Oh, her teeth are just fine, fine.
I'm serious. Now, probably you've got a lot of things to do besides monkey with a hobby like horse races. Personally, it's not very lucrative. And if you're just starting out, you ought to take the advice of an old master and give it up at the beginning while you're still on the winning end. There. You're $24,000 richer.
18. I've got no objection to horse racing, Mr. Neary. There are just some people who can make money out of it, and some people who can't. didn't you say you had another horse around here?
Well, fan my brow. Don't tell me that filly of yours could run again.
Well, it's like this. I raised her up from a colt. She wouldn't be nothing but skin and bones if it weren't for me. And she knows it. She appreciates a good trainer when she has one, and she'd be happy to run another race. Of course, I'll admit, it's kind of dark outside.
See here now, if you think you can do it without windbreaking her, I've got old 100 over here. He's one of the fastest geldings I've ever had in my stables, if you don't mind taking another check.
Mr. Neary, that check is good enough for me.
Old 100 came up and went down. And when the dust had settled, Cliff stood with his hands in his pockets of his leather jacket, the brim of his hat pulled down, and his shoulders hunched with chill.
I'm sorry, Mr. Neary.
Said Pat, climbing down from Old 100.
When we got into the stretch, I just plain couldn't even see that filly's tail. She was that far ahead. Maybe I just ain't much of a rider, Mr. Neary.
Oh, say not so.
Said Cliff, putting his arm around Pat's shoulders.
You're just up against a wonder horse, that's all. That's 3 times I've been trimmed, Mr. O'Dowd. You wouldn't mind consider selling that horse, would you?
With Angus and Tony looking on and gaping, O'Dowd gazed first at his shoes, then at the moon, and then at Mr. Neary. Gadget knew his danger here. If he didn't go along with this sale, Cliff, horse-hungry, would become more and more insistent, finally discovering the extremely mechanical identity of Stardust, a discovery which would lead to argument.
Well, I might entertain an option. On one condition.
Well, now, a little old thing like a condition shouldn't stand between a couple of good horse traders.
The condition is, she won't ever be used for breeding purposes.
I think that could be arranged. Would $50,000 make the deal attractive? Say $10,000 now as an option and $40,000 tomorrow?
Oh, I can't deliver her right away. She's on a special diet, and I wouldn't dare take her off of it. You'd be surprised how that diet affects her. I've been making some scientific observations on her, too, and they won't be complete until Thursday morning.
Angus and Tony looked on in amazement. They had never got used to the glib and convincing way Gadget had with them when the necessity demanded it.
Why Tuesday morning?
Well, we've got to observe the final effects of the diet. And then you can have her.
And you'll give me the diet, too.
Oh, you bet I will.
Cliff finished writing out his check and gave Gadget his hand.
It's a deal, my boy. My trainer will be up at your place Thursday morning to pick up the filly. Come along, Pat. Let's get out of this place while we still have enough money left to pay Uncle Sam his income tax. Goodbye, Mr. Marconio and Mr. McBain. Come on, Pat. You'll be riding winners yet.
Gadget stood looking after them as they left. Angus grabbed his arm.
Ouch, laddie. How terrible it'll be, the sight of you behind bars. Not only are you selling him something that ain't a horse, but it's the property of United Pictures. Crime does not pay, me boy.
Not very well, anyway. But cheer up. We have till Thursday morning to think up the rest of the idea.
You mean you don't know?
No, not yet.
What a nerve, what a nerve. Let's load up and get out of here before you have any more of these half-thought-up ideas.
Remind me when we get home to put the entry in my book. $18,000 to be paid back with interest to Mr. Neary. He was just too nice about it. I haven't got the heart to take the money without putting it in me book to be paid off, even if we did win it fair and square. He asked us to raise him. We didn't ask him.
Well, what about the option money?
Don't worry. We'll find something.
Gadget seemed rather cheered now that he had decided to put Cliff's name in the book as one of those to be repaid when the trip was finally made. He fingered the checks and even whistled a little on the way home. Stardust, having successfully broken down 6 doors without having sustained any injury, left the western set north of San Fernando in a shocking state of disrepair. And on Wednesday, the shooting of the picture started on schedule. At 7 o'clock in the morning, everybody bundled up and went out onto the location at Gray's Ranch. Gadget looked over the scene of action. A big, flimsy barn had been built. The roof beam was sawed half through, and when the building burned, that roof would come down, but quick. Wires and pulleys would assist the cave-in of the roof, and mounds of hay contained flares. They were all piled about. The property man was giving the hay a final sloshing with smudge solution. There had to be a lot of smoke. The stuntman went over the place to make sure there was nothing to trip over. He was a devil-may-care young man to all appearances, but in common with all good stuntmen, the largest part of his daredeviltry consisted in the minuteness with which he planned the staging of his scenes. The stuntman spent a few moments with Gadget going over the details of the shot. Veronica Morris and Peter Butler were there, eating a belated breakfast in the shade of Butler's dressing room trailer.
Why, hello, Gadget.
Mr. Butler called out.
Why, that's Gadget O'Dowd over there.
He told Miss Morris.
Where? Oh, hello, Mr. O'Dowd. I hope you fixed it so that poor stuntman won't get hurt. I'd feel pretty dreadful if anything happened to him for my sake.
He'll make it all right.
Well, let's see it.
Now, folks.
Said the director.
There's no hurry about this. Morning, Miss Morris. I'll have a cup of that coffee if you don't mind. Well, I see you got the horse here all right, Gadget.
Well, I want to see that thing in action. I almost died laughing over that mechanical monkey Gadget built for that last Tarzan picture.
Oh, I remember that. He certainly was a wonderful animal. Where is it now, Mr. O'Dowd? I don't suppose you could be persuaded to part with it.
Well, the last I saw of it, it was jumping up and down on Jackie Bocker's front lawn. When the accountancy department gets through with me, I suppose it'll be lying on the scrap metal heap in some local junkyard.
A cameraman came up with an assistant director.
We've got 3 cameras on it, sir.
Well, make sure you get it the first time. That barn will only burn once.
Oh, I suppose that's my cue.
Oh, I've got to see this,
said Mr. Butler. He picked up his bad man's hat and followed O'Dowd over toward the horse trailer. Angus was ready with the control box, and Tony let down the back gate. Stardust stopped being immobile and began to champ and whinny. She backed down the ramp, turned, pricked up her ears, and, at Gadget's tip-off wink to Angus, Stardust came nuzzling up to Veronica Morris for a piece of sugar.
Oh, why, it's a real horse.
Not if you put your ear to it.
Why, that's Stardust! They'd won the sweepstakes!
The director took one look and turned to the script girl. They put their heads together for a moment, and the director came up.
No, it won't do. 2 scenes further along that we've already shot have a Sora without any forehead blaze.
Oh, sorry, they didn't give me a script. Angus, hand that box of paint down here, will you?
In a very short space of time, watercolor had remedied the situation handsomely, and the script girl was satisfied. The property man came over and saddled Stardust with the proper riding equipment. The stuntman gave his mount wide-eyed admiration.
Mind if I try a couple tests on it?
He said. He mounted up. Gadget made the horse prance, cavort, and strike with its front feet. Finally, he put Stardust into a dashing run.
Well, for once,
said the cameraman,
we won't have to speed up the film on that one. That hunk of junk can really get out of here.
The director gave the order for
places.
The front doors to the barn were securely barred on the stuntman. Gadget took up his station just off the scene. He had his control box all adjusted and tuned.
Camera and action!
An expert archer sent a blazing arrow across the scene into an explosives-loaded hay pile at the front of the barn. A second firebrand followed it, sticking in the side wall. A third thunked solidly into the shingles, and in a moment, the dry, explosive-impregnated material flared and yellow fire curled greedily across the structure. More hay piles caught. The flames were beginning to crackle and roar. Gadget waited until the entire front of the building was blazing. Then, with an urgent wave from the assistant director, he set Stardust in motion. The roof was already beginning to sway. The temperature in the barn must have mounted to about 130 degrees. Stardust began to plunge and rear. Then it dashed forward, flung up its hoofs, and brought them down solidly against the doors. The doors caved. The assistant director's men gave a yank, and the roof started down. Out came Stardust, narrowly missed by two blazing beams, nearly swallowed in clouds of white smoke and billows of yellow fire. The stuntman, dressed in ladies' riding garb, was leaning on the neck and holding on in earnest. Stardust plunged and fled off down the road at fast run. Arrows and crossbow bolts thunked in her wake. She vanished far up the lane. The director called...
And cut!
Next followed 3 shots done on another set of the now somewhat singed Stardust, plunging and rearing in a mock interior. She had to break down a burning door in here, too. At 11 o'clock, the work was finished. And, mounted on a real horse, Veronica Morris was ready to follow through with the close-ups. Gadget, having lunched with the director and chief cameraman, receiving praise all around for his remarkable horse, was now free to return to his laboratory and do what he considered much more important work. As Gadget and Tony were backing Stardust up to the horse trailer, they had one slight encounter with the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals representative, who wanted to examine the
injury sustained by the horse in that last scene.
In the end, the representative, who turned out to be quite a nice lady after all, was their most appreciative audience. She just couldn't get over it. They let her examine a couple of bolts down the throat and unscrew a couple of teeth.
You are a genius, my boy. You are just a genius. You should have proper recognition. Why, I mean, there are museums all over this country that
Oh
would just
no, I
diamonds
could
so-
never do it again. It was just a fluke.
They finally escaped from the terrible prospect of the very unprofitable proper recognition as the woman walked away.
That was a narrow one. If we ever got recognition, we couldn't make enough to fly to Canada, much less the moon.
They loaded the scorched Stardust into the trailer and they wheeled on home. Miss Franklin was waiting for them. She had gripped in her hand a green slip of paper which she had obviously been holding half the morning in anticipation of their return. Gadget took one look at it and knew what it was. The $2,520 kickback from the Racing Museum. $2,800 minus 10%.
Now, don't tell me this is a personal debt. The boy told me that he was to only give it to Gadget O'Dowd.
Then how did you get it?
Tony looked mournfully at a torn-up flower bed.
Boss, she can wrestle, too.
That skin the Racing Museum gave your mechanic can go right back to them. It will cost me a whole lot less to give than $2,800 to have it restuffed. It looks to me, Mr. O'Dowd, like you don't need any such budget. This makes you exactly $2,520 under your estimate.
Gadget looked at her and sighed deeply. He went into his own office and slammed the door. The following morning, bright and early, Cliff's trainer, Pat, drove up with a horse trailer, which made the rental job look like something off a salvage pile. His men opened the door of this glittering creation invitingly. Pat went into the office to find Mr. O'Dowd. Fortunately, Miss Franklin considered her office hours to be from 9 to 5. Movie people are ordinarily up long before that.
Well, here I am.
Well, I see you are.
Shall we load the horse aboard now?
Well, you see, I've been thinking this thing over rather carefully, and I've decided
Well,
that...
you're not going to back out on the deal now.
Well, I was thinking
Mr. O'Dowd, you look to me like a man of your word. You wouldn't go back on Mr. Neary, would you? He could do you a lot of good.
That's not all he could do him.
Gadget was thinking fast. If he confessed this sin, he would certainly have to refund Cliff's losses. But if he didn't, then he would have to give Cliff the horse. Due to his disturbed state of mind because of the $2,520 hole in the budget, he had not come up with the brilliant idea of which he had thought himself capable.
Where is that horse? She's all right, isn't she?
Gadget was about to report the theft of Stardust when one of the men spotted her in the bar.
Funny place to keep a horse. I hope she doesn't drink. Well, shall we load up?
She looks kind of singed. What happened to her?
Nothing serious. Nothing serious at all.
Oh, there's a funny look about that horse.
Well, she's just a little bit off her feed today. All that running didn't help her any. Tony, we are being very remiss in our hospitality. Take this gentleman inside and give him something to eat or drink.
I got a fresh cup of coffee if you want some.
Oh, you go ahead. I'll pull her out of the trailer.
Tony hustled them inside, and Gadget loaded Stardust on board the super deluxe horse trailer. When they came out again, Pat saw Stardust's ears above the trailer side, handed Gadget the check from Mr. Neary, and they agreed to sign all the necessary papers on Saturday morning. Hands were shaken all around, and soon the yard was deserted. 10 seconds later, Miss Franklin drove on the scene.
What was that horse trailer?
The smile which Gadget had worn at the departure now vanished.
Well, you see, that's Stardust.
You mean you've let somebody else have a piece of property belonging to United Pictures? You must realize that there is a lot of valuable equipment in there that could be salvaged. You've already exceeded your budget.
Do you mean to say that we've got to go to all the toil of breaking that horse apart?
Said Angus, coming belatedly to work.
I mean just that. We'll restore that hide to the museum and put all its various parts back on the inventory.
She went into her office and could be heard arranging things for her day. Gadget looked at Angus.
Bring the control box out.
Angus was in no mood to be lightly ordered about, but he went.
Dismantling the horse, filing parts, inventory. What the movie business isn't coming to would... What in the saintly name has happened to this control box?
He came back out, his basic anger building.
Mr. O'Dowd, some scut has unsoldered.
Give it here. I was in a hurry. I didn't know when they'd look at me. Give me that box.
Miss Franklin, curious as to what was going on out in the court, issued from her office aggressive as an overdue bill.
What are you doing? When the front office learns...
Suddenly, a roaring whine resounded in the sky. Looking up, a terrified Miss Franklin beheld a horse. It had been rising ever since the trailer had begun to move, having issued straight up, and now it had a very, very long way to come down. Miss Franklin screamed. Stardust was falling faster now, falling with the gathering speed of a blockbuster, falling so fast that the air was split and scorched. Down came Stardust from its suspended station. Down came Stardust, getting bigger and bigger, louder and louder. Down came Stardust with a crash! Dust shot away. Hoofs and hide contracted, seemed buried in the earth, and then bounced with a geyser of wheels, cogs, tubes, rheostats, and useless condensers mingled with spattering, twisted pieces of torn hide. The dust settled, slowly, quietly, and much of it upon a cowering Miss Franklin, whose disarrayed nerves were almost as damaged as the late and unlamented Automagic horse.
Gravity repulsor. Installed it at the last minute in a streak of proud genius. Works fine, doesn't it, Angus?
He looked good-naturedly at Miss Franklin.
Gravity repulsor. Installed to conduct a scientific experiment in the interests of the future of safety of stuntmen. Solder seems to have broken, so I couldn't slow it down.
What happened?
Why? In the interest of picture research, we installed a gravity repulsor which lifted Stardust out of the trailer and deposited her back here where she belongs. And I think you will find that this experiment cost exactly $2,520 to conduct, including the cost of the gravity repulsor unit. Of course.
He looked brightly at the scattered remains which were strewn widely across the flower beds. Miss Franklin gulped, looked at Gadget with a baffled but dawning respect, and then took her tired way into her office.
Lottie, 'tis a great project on which we're embarked. But I'm thinking if you keep this up, you find it necessary to go to the moon. Aye, and the devil of a lot farther before we're done.
Boss, that sure was a bang-up solution to that problem.
Gadget reached into his jacket pocket and brought out the purchase checks which Mr. Neary had given him for the sale of Stardust. He handed them to Tony.
This hurts me more than I can say, but one must be honest after all. Take them over to Mr. Neary and tell him how sorry we are that his new horse ran away. Tell him it was a bad habit she had anyway.
Give him back his 50 G's.
My boy, how you have evidently forgotten how much money we made off him on the bets. My conscience wouldn't permit me to keep his checks for a horse he never owned.
Ah, boy, oh boy, your conscience is the most expensive thing we got.
He pulled on his gloves, took the money, and drove away. In the dark of night, another mile of tunnel to a gamma room was started in the Hollywood Hills. And enough metal for a spaceship's bow was smuggled the very next day straight under the vigilant nose of Miss Franklin. Gadget and Angus and Tony were that much closer to the moon.
I hope humanity appreciates the trouble we've gone to for it.
But there was so much noise around the busy forge that Angus and Tony didn't even hear him.
I got the horse right here, the name is Paul Revere, and here's a guy that says if the weather's clear, can do. This guy says the horse can do. If he says the horse can do. I pick him Valentine, 'cause on the morning line, the guy has got him figured at 5 to 9.
But as an epitaph, he went to buy a hat, according to this here and that telegraph.
For Paul Revere, I'll fight, I hear his foot's all right.